Hi, my name is Dr. Miriam Snellgrove, and I am a research fellow on the BAMSA Bridge, a Mind Sport for All project led by Professor Samantha Punch and based in the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Stirling. Myself and Samantha are both sociologists, and I'm going to be presenting you with a flavour of the data that we have collected from our Bridge in the Time of COVID project. This project came about very serendipitously due to the pandemic when most face-to-face research had been halted. And we took the opportunity to start this project because Bridge as a card game had up until then been predominantly played in a face-to-face capacity in village halls, in hotels and in tournaments around the world. And suddenly COVID and lockdowns put a halt to that. And there was then a very strong move to playing Bridge online, and our project tried to capture the changes that occurred due to COVID and in the lives of people who played and engaged in Bridge. Before I kind of carry on and give you some more details about the project, though, I think it's very important for me to try and explain what Bridge is. You will probably have come across Bridge through various cultural presentations, perhaps in an Agatha Christie novel or TV adaptation or in Ian Fleming's work, where James Bond actually plays Bridge, not poker. But these presentations in the 50s and 60s are very much Bridge is the after-dinner party game of choice and played by upper middle class people after dinner, where you are also potentially dicing with death. And that really signals the kind of heyday of Bridge in the 1950s. And since then, if people think about Bridge at all, they often associate Bridge as a card game with older women and not really associated as a game that is fun. And one of the side aims of BAMSA is to really try and get more young people involved and interested in understanding the joys of playing Bridge. But now I'm going to try briefly to explain the mechanics of the game. But if you do have any sort of further technical questions about Bridge, please feel free to ask them of Samantha afterwards. I myself am not a Bridge player. Samantha is an international Bridge player and so understands this game fantastically, whereas my explanation is going to be necessarily a little basic. So any mistakes that are presented here, these are the fault of myself alone. Fundamentally, though, Bridge is a partnership game. It is played by 4 people at a table and partners sit opposite each other. The 52 cards that exist in a deck of cards are dealt out, so each person has 13 cards in their hands. What then proceeds to happen is a series of bidding, where each partnership is trying to win the bid. And once they have won the bid, they are trying to play their hand out fully, or they are also simultaneously defending if they're the opposing partnership. So what I have listed up on the slide there of 1 to 4 doesn't necessarily happen in that linear fashion. 2 to 3, playing a hand, being dummy and defending happens simultaneously. And then the hand usually takes 7 to 8 minutes to play, and the final element of it is to the scoring and who has won and who has lost. The key thing to understand here about Bridge is that it is a game of mistakes. You're constantly trying to judge, based on the incomplete information on the cards in your hand, what your opposing partnership is going to lay and play. And so there is constant mistakes in that kind of judging and assessment. It is also a game that is one where highly technical, very complicated, and even those playing at the most elite level say they are continually learning and constantly surprised by the game. Now, as previously mentioned, the project came about because of COVID, and we swiftly pulled together a research proposal, got it through expedited ethics, and in 3 weeks into the UK's national lockdown in April, middle of April, we sent out recruitment letters to a variety of Bridge organisations, Bridge clubs, posted recruitments on Facebook and the Bridge Winners blog. And I have to say that what was crucial to the success of this was Sam, because she is a Bridge player and was regarded therefore favourably in the Bridge world. I put up my hand and say I only managed to recruit maybe 5 participants. So if it had been down to me, the project would have died a quick and swift death. But we sent out this call for participants, and we basically were asking people to document in their own way and in their own kind of voice, as it were, how and in what ways the pandemic and COVID and these lockdowns had changed their relationship to Bridge and how their bridging lives had been altered irrevocably due to COVID. And from April to December, we collected over 134 participants who sent us individual accounts, and we have nearly 300 individual diary accounts. Some participants wrote multiple accounts over a long period of time, and others just wrote a one-line response or a short, brief one-off account. 94 of our participants are over the age of 50, with the majority over 70, and then below that 60. So really, our participants are reflective of a Bridge population that is largely older and retired. We got responses from over 19 nationalities around the world. Unsurprisingly, because the call out was in English, we received responses from the USA, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, predominantly. However, we also received accounts from China, Japan, France, Germany, Norway, Poland, the Netherlands, India, Greece, South Africa. So it's astonishing, and all of those accounts have been written in English. What was also interesting is that historically, there is some critique of diary data being that it is often the province of more highly educated middle-class women tend to like to write these accounts. And in our sample, in our project, we have many more men writing to us than women. So again, something that we will be unpacking further. Just to explain a little bit why we engaged with diaries, yes, COVID had shut down the capacity to engage in face-to-face interviews or observation, but our project was really inspired by Ken Plummer's work on documents of life, and this idea that documents in the broadest possible sense litter our lives and indeed help structure the fabric of our social life. And kind of recognizing that people explore and engage in a way of narrating and understanding their lives in ways that create meaning for them. And the diary, in that sense, is one of the most widely used and recognized tools that people have used historically to work out their own thoughts in writing their personal diary, but also in exploring and documenting everyday life. And then, of course, there are researcher-led diaries. And what we found in our project is that, much like Sullivan in her exploration of gendered time, that some of our participants early on in the project much preferred a set of questions, that we would ask them more specific questions about, how had COVID changed, in what ways, were they playing more or less bridge, and they would respond much more to those kind of targeted questions. That was, however, a minority of our sample. Most of our sample were like Elliot with their work on experiences of illnesses, free text diaries where people really wrote how they wanted and in the way they wanted about bridge and COVID. And as previously mentioned, we had 5 regular contributors who wrote a series of continuous accounts from April really into some of them October. And one participant in particular has written over 73 accounts documenting her bridging life and engagement with COVID and what that has meant for her. So before I turn to our data, I think it's just briefly important to think about what it means to document the everyday during a pandemic. The everyday is a kind of sometimes a contentious and problematic phrase because it seems to mean everything and nothing. We use the everyday the whole time, and that seems like obvious, we know what it means, but at the same time, when you unpack what it means, it can often be unclear. So I think how we were thinking about the everyday was very much, as Cloak, Krang, and Goodwin note, is an arena of social life that includes repetitive daily cycles and routines that we learn but eventually take for granted. And that was really the crucial thing here, this idea that everyday life is routine, repetitive, and taken for granted. But as a result of that, researching the everyday can sometimes seem, as Hall and Holmes have argued, prosaic and parochial. But what what everyday scholars have argued prior even to the pandemic is that researching the everyday and focusing on those detailed micro accounts actually reveals broader macro structural processes and inequalities about, for example, who is doing the caring and the gendered work in a home during a pandemic or beforehand, who is responsible for these kinds of small things that seem very mundane and everyday but are actually linked to broader patterns and inequalities. And so that's the kind of basis from which we were working. And then obviously a pandemic comes along and it blows out of the water all of those routine, repetitive, rhythmical, taken for granted ways of understanding everyday life. And therefore what we see as normal and mundane becomes overturned. And that's evident in the pictures on the slide there, where you have a picture of the empty streets of London and empty supermarket shelves, which I think was a scene repeated around the globe during the various lockdowns that different countries have imposed. But what that means when you disrupt and challenge the everyday is that, particularly in the bridge world, there was a huge move and effort to try and get people to go online in the hope that though there was this disruption and uncertainty, there would be some kind of stability through the playing and engaging bridge online. Now, prior to the pandemic, there was one kind of solid bridge platform that people would play on, and that was called BBO, Bridge Based Online. But people kind of used that much more for practicing rather than actually, really playing competitively. And the problem with BBO was that you couldn't actually see your participant, the other players, you couldn't hear, you could chat, but you couldn't really hear or see. And what also happened then with this massive move to everyone playing bridge online during the kind of pandemic was that there was problems and issues around cheating, as in it was easy to log into BBO as a different user or a different identity and see the other player's cards, and therefore you could win brilliantly because you'd seen them. So it kind of undermined the issue of the game. And so throughout the pandemic, another platform was developed called Real Bridge, which you can see on the slide in front of you, where you could see your participants and also hear them and send chat. And this was the hope that you could have the social element coming back into bridge, but also it might help police the cheating in a slightly more useful way. And a key issue, obviously, of moving people onto bridge during a pandemic, given, as we've said, a large proportion of particularly our sample were older people, was making sure that the entire move online was done with all the clubs. So you were playing against people you knew. And so that familiarity, whilst learning a new technology, made it much more interesting and accessible. So now swiftly and quickly powering through some of the data we have here. Many participants embraced the digital wholeheartedly. The pandemic came along, various lockdowns in different countries happened at different points, and this capacity to play bridge in a face-to-face environment that had normally been there was removed. So a lot of people talked about how this move had been transformative for them. They were often high-risk categories, being older, having underlying health conditions, and therefore being able to play online was a safe and enjoyable way to play without exposing them to any of the attendant COVID risks. So as you can see from some of the quotes on the slides, people were saying they were playing more now than ever, but there were also a lot of enjoyment and enthusiasm in the fact that they didn't need to be stuck in a car driving to a bridge club, that there wasn't the attendant commuting issues, and that you were also able to play and watch other professionals online, as well as playing with people around the world. So there was just a large proportion of the data where people were very enthusiastic about playing online. However, it wasn't all sunshine and roses, and there were equally a similar number of people, and this was true the longer the pandemic went on, that we're just getting very fed up of bridge. Initially, bridge playing online was great, and it was better than nothing, as they have said, but there was a longing increasingly for a return to face-to-face, and that it had become clear to some participants the longer the pandemic went on, the longer lockdowns happened, then the reopening of some clubs and the shutting down when another lockdown occurred, that really what they loved and enjoyed most about bridge was the social aspect and interacting with people. And they were just tired of constantly being in front of a screen, plus the technological glitches and getting to know and play those things just put people off. And they just felt that online was a poor substitute. So overall, what became very clear was that the pandemic has brought digital bridge into people's lives, whether they wanted it to or not. So some have embraced this wholeheartedly, but for others, this is not necessarily a great end or a great way that they want bridge to carry on into the future. However, clubs and organisations have said that they see digital bridge as kind of the new normal and simply a part of how everyday bridge is going to be played in the future, that when they come back to face-to-face, there will still be digital matches. However, what's also become clear from our data is that playing bridge in a pandemic world is so important for people who are older, who often felt marginalised by government's responses and taking their health concerns seriously. And so actually what happens here is that this is an important way for them to have a sense of meaning and solidarity and belonging. So I just want to quickly finish with a final quote from a participant who had been saying how sad and lonely she had been in the early part of the quote throughout the pandemic, but that Saturday, I was invited to a close friends for a game of bridge in the garden. We had our masks, hand sanitizer, large table, carried our bidding boxes with us every time we moved places. The cards were last used 2 to 3 years ago in our friendly league, so we're only touched by one person. Brilliant. I almost felt normal. So I've power raced through that. Thank you very much for listening and watching. If you do have any questions at all, please feel free to drop us a line or an email or go to our project website. Thank you.